me very angry. And it makes me even angrier to know that they tried to keep it from us. And it's only now that we're finding out that. And I'm really glad that Jim touched on that. However, this is the part where you guys get to ask some questions of our panel. I've got 2 roving mics, one on that side, one on that side. I'll take questions from the floor, and if you could make a question, that would be really good, because I know there's a lot of people wanting to ask questions and they want to get answers, so please make it a sharp question if you can. And if you could maybe indicate who you want initially to answer it, that would be helpful too. So with that, can I just take a second just to move the microphone? Hold on. George in the middle there, I'll get you started then. Quick question, George. If you've got another hand up, I'll take the next one. Lady there in the purple.
Thanks very much. I would like to point out, not a member of any political party, but I would like
Can you take it a wee bit away from your mouth? It's just a wee bit.
Sorry.
That's better.
I'll stand up a bit. I would like to thank the Yes campaign for organising this meeting. I think it's very important, as you say, to get back to grassroots. However, the question I would like to ask is concerning the point the doctor touched on. The European Union's deal with America and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which will force our governments to have secret courts if they feel the monopoly powers challenged. So far, I don't think Alex Salmond or any leader at Holyrood has said that they won't sign this agreement. So what I would like to know is, could you tell me if either the Scottish Nationalist Party, I don't think Labour or the Lib Dems or the Tories would refuse to sign it, but surely we should refuse in the event of a yes vote to refuse to sign that agreement on the grounds it will destroy our National Health Service, or at least give us a referendum on it.
I would just like to point out I'm not a spokesman for the SNP, so I can't actually promise anything. But I would totally agree that this, I mean, again, there's not been very much discussion about this, and it's as if, oh, well, you know, this is too complicated, this is not something for the public. This is something that will actually affect all of us. So obviously it has the ability to unravel the NHS in England. If we are just a region, the border will not protect us, because that would be considered a trade border. So exactly as you say, they could sue the Scottish Government for billions and push their way in Scotland. I'm worried about TTIP in total, because it involves things like declaring food additives, GM crops, chemicals, hormones in beef, chicken soaked in water, etc. And the thing is, we actually in Europe have much higher safety regulations to do with public health and to do with food than a lot of the American regulations. Now, there will be a negotiation, but the idea that we can make America come up to our level on everything is naive. Obviously, it's a trade, which means that there will be things where we end up dropping the level. What they talk about is it would bring in £4 billion worth of extra business to the UK. Now, the UK NHS is £110 billion. So you're talking 4%. Doing all of that for 4% of what you spend on the NHS. There's a health economist called Alison Pollock who has estimated that we spend about 10% of our NHS money on all the admin and all that kind of stuff. If you move to an insurance-based system like America, you spend 30 to 40%. You know, we get told that we have to have this drastic change down south to increase efficiency and decrease costs. Go home and look up a thing called the Commonwealth Fund, which is a Washington think tank that compares America with 11 other health services across the world every few years. They just published earlier this year, and they compared 11 countries. The UK system, now that was 2011 to 2013, so before these changes, came number 1 in 8 out of 11. It came number 2 in one, number 3 in another. The only parameter it did badly in was life expectancy. And they did say in their report that that's more to do with socio-economic. Healthcare, as I said, can't fix that. So if we're so good, are we really expensive? No, it's the second cheapest in the world. The only one cheaper is New Zealand, where you have to pay 140 smackers to go and access a hospital. So if we're so good, and we're actually so cheap, what are all these changes about? And if really you're 110 billion, you're actually going to spend 30 billion of that on administration, what is that as a trade in exchange for 4 billion? I can't understand why they want to do it, other than if it is this last step in the journey of deliberately getting in an Americanized healthcare system. What we talked about, which is these secret courts, it's not just within Britain. They would be bigger than our Supreme Courts. They're above the European Supreme Court. They are investor-state dispute settlement courts, and they are on a multinational basis. And it allows a company to sue a government for billions. Philip Morris, the cigarette maker, are suing Australia because they brought in plain cigarette packaging. So if you bring in any kind of public health measure, you know, or minimum alcohol price, anything like that, that they can claim would potentially drop their profits, they can sue them. So I would love to be able to say, hand on heart, I promise, that if we get independence, they won't sign. I would hope Europe would wake up and not sign. But what we're not even getting is Westminster at least trying to preserve the English NHS, whereas other countries in Europe are demarcating certain aspects of their economy to protect it from TTIP. And it's something that, you know, more people need to know about and be aware of and be speaking to their MPs and MSPs. And I saw an interview with quite a few, and they hadn't heard about it. You know, Willie Rennie, Ruth Davidson, different people who had, they're politicians, and they hadn't heard of TTIP. So be aware of it, look it up. It is a danger whether we're independent or not. But the threat to the NHS is if we are a region, you would not be exempt from American health companies coming in, because a border that was only a regional border would not be acceptable. They would simply sue the Scottish Government.
Before you ask your question, I'm going to make this like a wee bit of a competition. We've got a microphone this side and a microphone that side, so can I have hands up over here for the next question while you present your question?
This is also NHS, I hope it's not too specific, but my name's Muriel Robertson, I'm a retired health visitor, and it's another nurse's family that I'm asking about. She has a granddaughter who has Crohn's disease, and the regular blood tests that she has to have done are sent to an English lab for testing. Now, she did ask about this, and she was told we have a reciprocal arrangement. Could you explain a wee bit about that for us, and what difference will it make? You know?
I mean, this is one of the kind of recent scandals. Obviously, when Gordon Brown came out and said that we wouldn't get organ donations or blood transfusions from NHS Blood and Transplant. NHS Blood and Transplant, who only provide blood for England and Wales, we've had our own Scottish blood transfusion service all of my working life of 32 years. So the idea that we wouldn't get blood transfusion was not true. But Blood and Transplant had actually written to Nanette Milne MSP in August of last year, pointing out that they run the organ transplants for the whole British Isles, including Southern Ireland, and that therefore nothing would change. Things like blood tests, people going to Newcastle to get aortic stents. I sometimes have to send patients to Leeds. Obviously the whole Great Ormond Street thing, if you remember when Vote No Borders put that cinema advert up, it was actually Great Ormond Street who said, get that down, that isn't true. They treat children from 90 countries, and they would certainly treat ours. But one of the mistakes in this is people think we get given that. Believe me, we pay every penny for any patient who is treated over the border. So people who live near the borders and go to Carlisle, there are arrangements between Dumfries and Galloway and Carlisle. I have patients who end up being treated by me who from just over the border. All of that is being paid for. We do not get given anything for nothing. And these are called service level agreements, and we pay every penny of them, and they are protected by European directive, because in Europe they exist all over the place. You know, they don't have rivers or seas that demarcate their borders. Lots of people, you know, live in Holland, work in Germany and whatnot. So there are these arrangements throughout Europe, and these are not allowed to be taken away, so they will not change.
Gentleman in the middle, you have a hand up over this side. One at the very back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Torrance, retired shipbuilding worker from Govan, and welcoming the fact that Jim touched on possession. We are having arguments today at the moment for short tours in Govan and Yars about the exact thing you're saying. It would be very brief. What you didn't touch on, I'd like to hear your views on it, Jim. Caledonian McBrain ferries will require somewhere within 100 in the next 20 years. And that would be an avenue for work to be put in Govan and Yars. At the moment, the Rossi ferries built in Gdansk, Aberdeen ferries are built in Finland, and the new ferry for Stornoway to Liverpool is coming from Germany. So absolute nonsense for a Karl Marx, a nationalised industry. So I think that would be another argument that we can put to the government and Yard's workers, how we can retain these industries. Thank you.
The reason those ferries are being built elsewhere, and this is quite important, under the rules of the European Union, if it's something for the military, you can build in your own country, irrespective of anything else. If it's for civilian use, you've got to go out to international tender. Now, there are different ways to skin a cat. Yes, there is. I mean, the French are absolutely brilliant at it, let me tell you, inside the EU. The Royal Navy, it wouldn't be royal in my view, but then it might be in somebody else's. I'm an old sea dog as well. Now, the Scottish Navy, in my view, shouldn't have the purpose that we've been used to the Royal Navy having, and that's going out and killing folk all over the world. I would like to see, and I will argue when we're independent, that our Navy has a military function, that is to guard our maritime borders against drug smuggling and all that sort of thing, and fisheries protection. But it also has a responsibility to provide services to the community and internationally as well. So what you do is you make the ferries part of the Scottish Navy, and you overcome the fact that I say that because the book I wrote was called In Place of Fear 2. And it's 2 because In Place of Fear was written by a hero of mine, an Iron Bevan. I was only a wee boy. I never actually saw an Iron Bevan speak in the flesh. But I followed his career when I started in politics and started to read about him and all the rest of it. Got his book In Place of Fear. And what an Iron Bevan said to the socialist movement was, the most important in your weapon is audacity. The audacity to think the way the establishment tell you not to think, and the audacity to do what the establishment tell you cannot do. So if the European Union says to me, you have to put things out to tender, then I employ audacity and say, oh no, you don't understand. These ferries are part of our Navy. Not only that, let me tell you. There's a part of my book which some of my friends have discussed it with, told me not to put it in, that folk would mock the idea. But I held fast to it. There's a 16,500 ton ship called the Africa Mercy. run by a trust, which delivers medical services to the very poorest people in Africa. It does something like 3,300 surgical operations a year in 5 operating theatres. It goes and trains paramedics. It takes cataracts away for somebody who's blind. And, weighing with a cleft palate, it cures that. Now, just you think about that. If you're in a very poor African area and you've got cataracts, taking them away transforms your life. And for a child with a cleft palate there, curing that just absolutely changes your life forever. So I thought, well, there's 2 aircraft carriers. I ken they're going to put a crew on one, but I know the Royal Navy can't put a crew on the other because it's skint. So, and it's a liability. They would love to sell it, let me tell you. Probably the only one that would buy it would be Argentina, and they can't sell it to them. So in my book, I argue that it becomes the flagship of the Scottish Navy. And we take that second aircraft carrier, it's well beyond 16,500 tonnes, and we turn it into a hospital ship, an international rescue ship, full of doctors, nurses, paramedics, medicine, water, and everything you need when there's a catastrophe somewhere. That would mean that we would be sending our young men and women, for the first time, out into the world to heal people, not kill them. A lot of people before I wrote the book, up and down Scotland, get rid of some ideas that weren't any good. But I talked to a man called Dr. Harry Burns, who's recently retired as the Chief Medical Officer of Scotland. He's now a professor at Strathclyde University. And Harry said 2 things to me. First of all, this would be a great thing for us to deliver to the poor in the world who have no medical cover. Secondly, he said, what this would do to Scotland's international reputation. Now, I mentioned what Marco said, imagination and innovation. The great thing about being independent is you can think of things to do which you cannot do in devolution or in the Union. We can do anything we like. If we want to build hospital ships, if we want to convert that to a hospital ship, nothing on this earth prevents us doing so if the majority of our people believe that's the right thing to do. I've got a name for the flagship, the greatest humanitarian that we've ever born in Scotland. Let's call it the Robert Burns.
Gentleman at the back, and have a show of hands on this side of the hall, the other microphone.
I like your imagination and vision, Jim. It's been lacking in this campaign so far from both sides. I'm John Black, the leader of the Scottish Jacobite Party. We've decided that the Conservatives aren't going to fix the situation, neither are Labour and Ed Miliband or the Lib Dems. We've had an elected government in Scotland since 1997. The SNP have been in charge since 2007, and they're in the process of destroying Scotland. Jim mentioned that our dreams are destroyed by the London connection. After independence, there's a danger that our dreams will be destroyed by the Edinburgh connection. The image was portrayed that NHS Scotland is fine. I think NHS Scotland is close to collapse. But currently, the official government policy is to recruit doctors worldwide from some of the poorest countries in the planet. I think that's an absolute scandal and disgrace. Comments?
Question.
Well, certainly, having worked in the NHS for 32 years, I wouldn't remotely pretend that the NHS in Scotland is perfect or we don't have challenges. We face the challenges of all countries of older people living longer. I would like to think I've contributed to that problem a little bit. I was told at medical school that was the point. have to say that I disagree. I mean, absolutely, we have problems. We have problems with A&E, we have problems with numbers, we have problems with capacity. But I would say that I saw in my career, when we got devolution in '99, and therefore all the governments that we've had, a big change in Scottish NHS. So I disagree that it's on its knees. Absolutely, it needs help, it needs money, it needs a little bit more looking at what it requires rather than kicking it around at election time. We do need to think about how we deliver things, we do need to think about how we care for people who have chronic illnesses. And a lot of that work is actually going ahead at the moment. England is only beginning now to talk about things like social care combined with NHS. So not having someone stuck in hospital for months and months because they can't actually get the support to live at home. We've actually been trying to work towards that. We have a long way to go and a lot of work to do, but I would disagree. You know, it was the Labour and Liberal coalition in Edinburgh who brought in the smoking ban. It was them that got rid of Mrs. Thatcher's trusts. You know, I don't know, I'm sure some of you will remember that we actually had the internal market and the competition here. In Ayrshire we have two hospitals, one in Kilmarnock, one in Ayr, and they were set against each other. So we had all that. We were already on the first step of the journey. Unfortunately, just NHS England have just been galloping in that direction while we went back to being a single, unified public NHS. So I'm sorry, I disagree. I chaired the setting of breast cancer standards for Scotland. I saw Quality Improvement Scotland set standards for many cancers, many diseases, to set up the Patient Safety Initiative. All of these things that we can do because we're a single cooperative NHS that is lost down south. I will absolutely agree with you that we have a danger that after independence we just have business as usual and in a different city. But what I would say is that comes down to us. We've been up and we've been out for the last year and a half to 2 years. I have been, as I said, in all sorts of halls, all sorts of places, with women particularly realizing they have a voice, they can organize something, they can get together, they can discuss ideas. And that's something that's really important to me, that we have the women's voice in the independent Scotland. But what we all have to promise, if we get a yes vote, is that on the 19th of September we do not go back in our boxes. We need to stay out, we need to keep this energy going, and we need to ensure that we don't just get devolution or independence going to Edinburgh, that we actually get it to keep on coming across the M8 and up the M80 and up the A9. Because what we need is we need to have the ability in our own community to say, these are our problems, but I have an idea. At the moment, we sit and we do what Jim said, and we shout at the telly. All we need to do is this, and nobody hears us. And what we require is literally a devolution of power right down into communities, so that all of you who've taken the trouble to come out on this wet night will have the ability to be involved. Now, one of the things I've not understood is why the three opposition parties in Edinburgh are so against independence. Because all three of them have been dragged down by the London version of their party. The Conservatives have struggled since Mrs. Thatcher. The Labour Party lost many votes, including mine, after invading Iraq. And the Liberals blotted their copybook with the university fees. That wasn't done by the people in Holyrood. When we have independence, 2016 parties might look similar. By 2020, you'll be voting for a totally different ballot paper. And we need to make sure that in that time, we drag power right out so that everybody who wishes to be engaged, who has an idea, has somewhere to go. Because it's no good just changing Edinburgh. We actually have to change the communities we all live in. And we have to hear those voices, and we have to take those ideas and utilise them.
Can I just say, I am sometimes critical of the SNP Parliament, although I'm a member, I've never been expelled. The great agony they all have is they've got a block grant. They can't expand the money they've got, and it's been cut. So you have this terrible choice between paying more money to the NHS, you have to take it from education or care for the elderly. When we're independent, we can create our own absolute wealth in Scotland, and we're not placed in that dilemma. But what I want to say to you is, you think of the attendance here tonight. This is not unusual, let me tell you. I've been from Fort William, Campbellton, Doonty Annan, all over the place. This is now normal. This is the greatest civic movement Scotland has ever had. And it's the greatest self-education movement Scotland's ever had. We now have people, what we call, quote, ordinary people, who now understand economics, who now understand social policy, and who are now organised. And everywhere I've gone, Springburn about 3 weeks ago, I spoke on a platform with 2 young women, and I was very, very proud of them. They were 19, but they represent a generation that's now been politicised. They are not going home on the 19th of September to stand by. They're going to start creating new political forms, not necessarily new political parties, but new political forms inside Scotland. And you've got a responsibility to do that as well, you know. I want to ask working class audiences why you don't think of standing for Parliament. I get complaints about today's politicians. Ivan the other night in Troon raised a laugh in the community. He told this audience, there will be job losses in Scotland, he said, and I can give you right to the last figure. There'll be 59 of them, and they're all called MPs. Now, why do we applaud that? Because a new political class has grown. A lot of them, university politics, research for an MP or an MSP, MP or MSP. That much experience of life. Whereas you, in this audience, we've all been through the mill, we've been threatened with redundancy, we've been broke, we've raised families, they've had the measles, and all the rest of it. We've had family problems and all that thing. Everybody in this audience has an enormous experience of life. You are better qualified to make laws and policy for the rest of the people of this country than the political class sitting at Westminster and Holyrood. So don't complain about the political class, change them.
Scotland. I believe I'm a big fan of Leslie Riddick, I'm sure many of you are, in our book Blossom, and one of the things that really struck me was in Norway, I believe it's something around 1 in 400 citizens stand for election to the local councils, the local government structure. In Scotland it's 1 in 2,100, I believe. So Jim's absolutely right in that we need a different kind of complexion of the Parliament as well, but I also want to see that complexion reflect in all levels of government in Scotland, and I want to see more young people being able to say, oh, I feel a part of decision making in my local community.
And aggressive and horrible, so I just don't go near that. But I've seen the online stuff on both sides, and obviously now I've come in for quite a lot of it, which I find fairly unpleasant. But growing up in Belfast, working in Gaza, working in Lebanon, there's not been a stone thrown, there's not been a bomb, there's not been anybody shot. So, don't do yourselves down about how negative the campaign has been. And one of the things that I would have to say is that I find it hard to understand this complete lack of self-belief. And I think some of it is if you have been told for decades and decades and decades that you are kept. And that is the case. People believe, and the commonest thing that I hear is, well, I'd love Scotland to be independent, but we couldn't manage. And those are the people that are going to be upset. As I said, the heart and soul no voters, of course they should vote no. Heart and soul yes voters, we're going to vote yes, and we also have worked our wee socks off, and we'll know we couldn't have done another thing. But that group of people who vote no because the Daily Mail or the Daily Record said we couldn't, when the next 2 or 3 waves of austerity comes and things actually just get worse and worse, and then it turns out, like the Macron report, oh actually there was lots of oil, or this new oil that David Cameron suddenly flew up and flew back, but no, there's no oil, he just flew in and flew back, or the oil in the Clyde. That is actually what's going to cause bitterness. We as Scots, and I am an adopted Scot, and I have to say the Commonwealth Games was an eye-opener to me, because I was cheering Scotland instead of Northern Ireland. But all of us need to simply accept the result. I will need to accept a no vote. I will be sad, I will be heartbroken, I'll be in my bed for the September weekend with my duvet over my head. But I'll still have a job to go to on Monday, I'll still have patients to look after. And I would hope it will be the other way around. And that's something that people need to decide, that whatever Scotland votes, one side or other will be disappointed, but that we need to accept it and work our best for the country that we live in.
It was Churchill who said, "One's enough in a democracy." The man's quite right. It is quite remarkable. Any other country, we wouldn't need to bother worrying about the vote. It would be overwhelming. The reason that we are in this condition is that we've been subject to fear all our lives. I've been here before. I took part in the 1979 referendum just for an assembly with no real power. And they ran Project Fear then. I was at Govan Shipbuilders with a guy called George Cunningham, the man who invented the 40% rule that prevented our majority becoming a majority. And I'm standing with him and the men are there, and he told them bluntly, if you vote yes, we will not give you any warship orders. Now I thought they'd put the head in him because that's a real insult. But the interesting thing was, these men of the Clyde put their head down and began to shuffle their feet. Nobody challenged them. They ran Project Fear then. They put people on a train at King's Cross to Edinburgh. And when they crossed the border at Berry, they put on customs officers' uniforms and went up and down the train demanding to see your passport, because that's how it would be if you voted for an assembly. The Daily Express had a leader which said, if you vote yes, Bathgate will close, Linwood will close, Garcosh will close, and shipbuilding will go down the Swanee. That's what they told us in '79. That's the reason they began to run Project Fear this time, because it worked last time. Last time I was talking to terrified audiences who did believe we were too wee, too poor, and that the oil wasn't ours. There was a woman called Janie Buchan, great powerful figure in the Labour Party, who was a member of the European Parliament. And this is the mental state of the Scottish nation at that time. She went on television and said, it can't be Scotland's oil because we didn't put it there. Yeah, but the Scots didn't laugh then. They sort of said, aye, right, enough. I worked in the Arab world the last 15 years of my working life, and I told my Arab friends that, and they said, we didn't put it there either, but look what we did. But it's different this time. Project Fear has not worked. I'm talking to self-confident Scottish audiences who do believe that they individually or collectively are better running their country than the millionaire Tory toffs educated at Eton and Oxford. So this is different. And I don't think, let me tell you, and I'm not just flanneling you, I don't think it's going to be narrow. I think we're going to win by at least 55%. against that. A man said, "You're wrong. I've just put money on in the bookies, 56 and above."
A few hands now. We have the lady in the middle first. And the gentleman there standing up. Second question.
My name is Rose Harvey. I have a very specific question. I don't mind who answers it. I'm a member of the Green Party, as some people perhaps know that. Given that the west coast of Scotland has some of the strongest wind, wave, tidal powers anywhere in Europe, while I respect the fact that there is a huge amount of oil left in the North Sea and it has to be used, I'm passionately against Trident, and I feel very strongly that the people who work at Faslane, Scotstoun and Govan must have highly skilled jobs. Would it not be better for these workers to be encouraged to exploit renewable energy rather than exploit yet more oil, which contributes to climate change?
Well, I would certainly agree that we do need to enhance our renewables potential beyond what we currently have with devolution. But what certainly struck me, interestingly enough, is that renewables service agreements were actually removed from a piece of legislation at Westminster which allowed them to take power back from the Scottish Parliament, which is a serious concern. And I believe that with independence we can continue the work that the Scottish Government has already started on renewable energy, and we just need to drive that forward. But I would agree with you.
And that was taken back by the House of Lords in a wee amendment, not even discussed.
Well, I don't agree with you. And that's the great argument we can have in 2016 when we make the decision. I'm not opposed to us developing the wind and marine power and the work coming to our places here. The biggest problem we face in Scotland now is poverty that comes from gross levels of unemployment. That's the biggest problem we face. And I would not be in favour of having a brand new industry out there that we did not exploit to create the kind of jobs and the skills that we desperately need right now. So there's no contradiction between continuing what we're doing in the renewable energy, but we would be mad as a nation to have that resource, not exploit it, and not create the jobs that would give us the skills that our people require.
It's not so much a question as merely a statement.
Well, it needs to be very short, sir. Very short. There's actual questions here.
Right, I'm 17 years old, and during the war I was 7. And during the war we used to think there'll always be an England as long as Scotland stands.
Hi, it's just to the guy, the young boy on the end. You're talking about tuition fees. I've got 2 children at university, and at the moment they don't pay tuition fees thanks to the powers at Holyrood. What makes you think we're going to have to pay them if we do vote yes? Vote no, sorry. What makes you think we're going to have to pay them?
Well, what I do find concerning is that the UK government's approach to the marketisation of higher education means that they are putting actually less public spending into the sector itself. And university chiefs down south have actually said that because of the cuts they're getting, the charge, and they're not seeing the benefit of the fees, they actually need to increase them even further. I believe it was the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University who said they needed to be raised to £16,000. So we're kind of seeing, as Philippa said with the NHS, we're seeing a trajectory with higher education in England, and this does affect us. Yes, education is devolved, but it affects us through Barnett consequential spending. Reduction in public spending on education in the rest of the UK at Westminster results in consequential cuts to the Barnett formula to Scotland's budget. So I have a real concern that if we remain within the Union, we will not have access to the tax revenues that allow us to sustain policies like free higher education for Scottish students.
Can I just come back to that as well? the thing is that, as Graeme says, obviously, in actual fact, our higher education budget has been going down because, as Graeme says, we get a proportion of what is spent. If the government isn't spending it, if the children are spending it, which is already happening because they're paying £9,000 a year down south, then our money for higher education has already gone down. And it's still the same as the NHS. We get our pocket money set by Westminster. So when their children are paying 12 or 16,000 a year, when they're paying to go to the GP, when all the services are run by these array of private providers in 10 years' time. So your children might get through, my son will get through, but their children won't. And that's the thing. The thing is, if we really believe in these things, and Scotland was the first country to have free school education for everyone. If we believe in that so important, why would we not want to take that control in our hands? As I said early in my speech, we send more money to Edinburgh. Why not keep that money here and we make the decision? We don't invade people. We don't spend 100 billion on new Trident, because Trident dies in 2025. It's not keeping Trident, it's building a new Trident, and actually spend that on the health, education and opportunities of our people. And I don't think that we will have a budget that will keep up. Our budget has shrunk in the last 7 years and it will continue to shrink. And eventually a Scottish government devolved within the UK would be forced into having to introduce fees.
I don't believe that. I just think some people are scaremongering. I also ask, what happens when the oil's finished?
Yes, no, that's a very fair question. There's at least 40 years of oil. Now, I was at the graduation ceremony at Heriot-Watt University a month ago when one of my grandsons graduated. And the Vice-Chancellor then makes a speech. And he speaks to the graduates, then he tells the audience how the university is doing. And the Vice-Chancellor explained that the university was very pleased to announce that it had another great chunk of money from the major oil companies into a special department of the university to assist them in the development of North Sea oil and gas. And his words were, of course, it's going to last for decades. Now, in that 40 years, if we use it more sensibly than it's been used up until now, then we're talking about a different contribution to the development of Scotland. If I said to you, here, you won the lottery last night, you get £7 million, but if you spend it all quickly, it'll go. But if you invest it sensibly, you and your family and your children and your grandchildren will benefit from it. And that's the approach we have to take to oil. But I quoted Margot on imagination and innovation. And it's somewhat difficult for Scots at the moment to be able to think outside the box of the United Kingdom. The lady who's just asked the question is thinking inside the box of the United Kingdom, believing that the oil will run out. It's what you do during the period that the oil's there. I have argued, and I hope somebody will take it up when we come to elect the new government, that we create that Scottish National Oil Corporation I talked about. Now, there's two reasons for that. It gives us a window into the oil industry which we know nothing about at the present time. Scotland's very ignorant about the oil industry. So if we have our own National Oil Corporation, we get a window into what is happening and a better understanding. But we also then are, in a sense, taking the oil itself. Forget about the taxation. Actually getting benefit from the oil itself selling in the international market. And I've argued that the Scottish universities should in fact get 1/3 of the stake in the Scottish National Oil Corporation, which would then give them constant stream of revenue from the dividends into higher education. That can help us maintain free education at all levels. Now, the lady's question was, why do we think that it wouldn't be free if we vote no? And I'll tell you. Bear in mind what Joanne Lamont said. that this is a something-for-nothing society. Also, there's the idea of free tuition for universities has in fact been under sustained attack inside Scotland. What they've been saying is a university graduate who's getting their university tuition free will earn something like £100,000 more during their career than a boy or a lassie who leaves 16, and that's unfair. They've had an advantage, therefore there should be a graduate tax or there should be tuition fees right at the beginning. So don't think in Scotland we are intellectually free from the argument that people should pay tuition fees. And you've got to bear in mind what happens politically and intellectually in a country which has voted no and shot itself in the foot and taken its power and given its power away. We are wide open, let me tell you. Let me just quote from Nigel Farage, because we don't read the English papers, but you should read the English papers. This is what they say down there about Alex Salmond and Nicola. Salmond and Sturgeon are just mouthy, groggy pub drunks who think that they can make a point into fact by screaming it the loudest. And Nigel Farage said, there would have to be a reckoning after the no vote, not just on the West Lothian question, but on finances. And we'll come under enormous pressure when they say those young people get an advantage, the others don't, so we should take the advantage away from them. Be very careful what you're voting for when you vote no.
The baseball cap, chap with the red and blue jacket, his hands up earlier. I think I missed you, sir. No? And then
a very, very quick question from each of the panel. Yes or no? Do you think we're going to win?
This young chap here, this question. Any more hands?
My name is Stuart Wilson, I'm 19 years old, and my question laps into the younger generation, the poverty and the military sector of the independence referendum. I've seen quite a lot of my school friends, due to poverty and a lack of employment in this country, turn to the military sector to try and have some sort of financial stability. Now, a question that I've been wondering for quite a while is, since when you join the armed forces, be it the Navy, the Royal Air Force or the military itself, you swear allegiance to the Queen and country. And there has been quite a lot of debate saying that anyone who is in the armed forces currently, or is in the armed forces when Scotland goes independent, that they will be forced to move down to England to support, you know, Queen and country, as they would say. So I was just wondering if that is true or not.
Could you pass the microphone back to the man with the glasses? Take that question as well.
We've been talking a lot about money, of course, tonight, and the big question, the big topic that the No campaign keep using is what currency we're going to use. I'm quite fortunate with some of my friends here. We go abroad a lot, and we go to Denmark and Sweden and Norway. They all have their own currency. I know people who live in Malmö in Sweden, they travel every day to Copenhagen and vice versa. There's no problem whatsoever. But what would your thoughts on this be, Jim? I think personally we should just have our own pound, but I don't see that it's a problem. If I'm in Holland, the first thing they ask you is, well, what currency do you want to pay in? There's no problem. Perhaps you might have a thought on that.
I'll deal with the currency. Let me deal fairly with Alex Salmond's position. I don't agree with it, and I'll explain why. But what Alex Salmond says about it being beneficial to England is absolutely true. but we'll call it the rest of the UK England, because that's basically the folk that rule the price, and it's shortcut. They have had a balance of payments deficit for a very long time. They import more than they export. We provide a significant part of the balance of payments trade, because we export far more than we import. And Alex's point was that if you take those Scottish exports out of the UK total, then they become more exposed as a weaker economy inside the United Kingdom. Therefore, Alex says, it's in your interest to have a currency union. It's in our interest to have a currency union because there's no change takes place whatsoever. My objection, Alex perfectly correct in that. My objection is that that gives the Bank of England a say over the Scottish budget. And Mr. Carney of the Bank of England was very, very fair, quite objective when he said there has to be a loss of sovereignty if you're in a currency union. And I don't want to vote for Scottish sovereignty and then share it with the Bank of England. There are alternatives. We can just use sterling. Now, sterling is used worldwide. When a Japanese tourist comes to play golf at St Andrews, he doesn't ask George Osborne, "Excuse me, sir, can I use sterling?" It's there. Everybody in the world uses it the way we use oil. Dollars are traded in oil. If we go to Germany, then we're in the Eurozone, and we don't ask the bank in Frankfurt if we can use the euro, because it's used worldwide as well. The problem with that is that we are using the currency of a foreign country, which England, UK will in fact be. And we've absolutely no influence over that at all. Certainly it's one-to-one, but we've no influence. If we have our own Scottish currency, this is the policy I would argue, that we would keep sterling for a year or 2 years, no problem, while we set up our own central bank and our own currency, and peg it one-to-one with sterling. The Scottish currency would not be a weak one, for the reason I explained earlier. If you export more than you import, you draw in foreign currency reserves, like yen, dollars, sterling, and the euro. So our central bank would have very substantial underpinning with foreign currency. That would then allow us to make sovereign decisions about our own currency. And I think that's the sensible policy. But I don't want to assume I've been on the Margo Mobile all day. I better see me here.
Can I just start off a wee bit about the currency? Being Irish, growing up in Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland just kept the pound for like 50 years, and in Northern Ireland the shops took sterling or punts. When Ireland was in transition to the euro, they took sterling, punts and euros, and it really was no big deal. My husband's German. When they unified, the East Germans had the Ostmark, they had to change to the Deutschmark, and a few years later they changed to the euro. And they're not really doing too badly. All of you who are my age and above went through what was a much harder change in currency, which was decimalisation. And I remember, and I'd be like that now, going, "Excuse me, love, what's that in old money?" Like, how come that woman doesn't know? But really, currency is just what you choose to deal in. I would absolutely agree. It's been made into a complete bogeyman, and the danger, if we have our own currency, is actually to be too strong and that our exports would get too expensive because it's an oil currency. And the lady behind you who was saying, what do we do when the oil runs out? When I mentioned about the earliest half of the 20th century, we didn't have oil then. We do export more than we import. We have whiskey, we have tourism, we have food and drink, we have manufacturing, we have life sciences, we lead in computer games, we have a very high density of universities who, believe me, are just as inventive as you Scots have always been. You know, the telephone, the television, all the rest of it. That gene hasn't died out. It's alive and well in our universities. And if we control that, we can actually put resource to get things from the laboratory bench or the idea on a computer and connect it up with businesses so that it becomes a reality that generates money. Scotland would not struggle. Obviously it takes organisation and it takes effort, but we have so much potential here. We're not going to be too poor.
Folks, we've run out of time, so the person who spoke first has the privilege of saying the last one.
So just to kind of touch on the other two questions, in terms of the question regarding the allegiance and the armed forces, of course it is SNP policy that the monarch be retained in an independent Scotland, so I don't see how the oath would change if the monarch remained head of state. My personal view is that I favour a Scottish Republic, in which case my understanding is that it would be the army would swear allegiance to the state rather than to the monarch. In terms of the question that was asked, will yes win? I believe we will win, and I believe the reasons why we will win is positivity always trumps negativity. I believe that if you tell people that they're rubbish often enough and you keep doing it repeatedly, eventually they'll stop listening to you and say, I can go out and I can do this. And for those of you who yes in the audience, we've got 5 weeks left, so get out there and let's win it.
As a woman, I have to have the last word. Any of you who are here are yes. I hope that you're working your socks off. Any of you who are here who don't know and you still have questions will be hanging around for a while. Any of you who have moved to yes, get signed up and get working. It's 5 weeks today. It has gone from being a huge long campaign to being a blink of an eye left. We have a lot to do.